Although all modern crocodilians are amphibious, they and their relatives were once much more diverse. One of the most exceptional examples was a small land croc named Mekosuchus. While most land crocs were only distant relatives of the crocodilians, Mekosuchus was an actual crocodilian who had returned to a terrestrial lifestyle. Additionally, while most land crocs lived during the Mesozoic era, Mekosuchus was still alive just a few thousand years ago, long after the end of the most recent ice age. 4 species of Mekosuchus have been found so far. Some of these lived in Australia, while the last Mekosuchus populations lived in islands in the Pacific Ocean. All 4 species were small, only between 1 to 2 meters long. The fusion of their vertebrae has confirmed that they were fully grown adults when they died, rather than the juveniles of larger species. Mekosuchus's limbs were better suited for terrestrial locomotion than modern crocodilians, whose exceptional swimming capabilities have left them more sluggish on land. An intriguing proposal is that Mekosuchus was arboreal, meaning it lived in the trees. This is a contentious subject. Some paleontologists are of the opinion that Mekosuchus's limbs were not any more specialized for climbing than modern crocodilians. However, recent research has found that crocodilians are actually far better climbers than they were once given credit for. This is especially true for smaller crocodilians and juveniles, who can climb trees vertically. Therefore, the question now seems to be not whether Mekosuchus could climb trees, but how often it did. Since all Mekosuchus species lived in forested environments, it now seems difficult to argue that it wasn't at least somewhat arboreal. While a complete Mekosuchus skull still hasn't been found, what has been discovered was, like its legs, very different from the skulls of modern crocodilians. Their skulls are long and flat. In contrast, Mekosuchus's skull was shorter, taller, and rounder. The shape of its snout would have produced too much drag if it hunted in the water like its modern relatives. From the side, its skull resembles the land crocs from the Mesozoic era, such as Mekosuchus. However, Mekosuchus's skull was still wide, like most other crocodilians. The eyes and nostrils of most crocodilians are on the top of their skulls, which allows them to keep most of their body hidden beneath the water without alerting their victims. In contrast, Mekosuchus's eyes and nostrils were instead on the sides of the skull, like most other terrestrial species. Among its living relatives, Mekosuchus's short skull most closely resembles the dwarf crocodiles and the 2 species of caiman in the Paleosuchus genus. They spend more time on land than most other crocodilians, and their short skulls are thought to be adaptations to the dense forest they live in. Since Mekosuchus also lived in tropical rainforest and was fully terrestrial and potentially arboreal, it would have had even stronger evolutionary pressure for a short snout. As a drawback, this restricted the size of the animals Mekosuchus was able to hunt. The back teeth of one species, Mekosuchus inexpectius, were specialized for crushing. Since it lived on an island, its teeth are thought to have been an adaptation for consuming crabs and mollusks, allowing it to exploit the limited resources of its island home. Due to a combination of Mekosuchus's terrestrial lifestyle and its small size, it couldn't have used the crocodilian death roll when feeding. Examination of its neck vertebrae has found that to compensate for this, it had larger epiaxial neck muscles. This would have allowed it to make stronger head movements to tear its meals apart while on land. The oldest species of Mekosuchus, Mekosuchus whitehunterensis lived in Australia at the very end of the Oligocene, about 23 million years ago. The next species, Mekosuchus sanderi, lived during the following Miocene. During this time, Australia was significantly lusher than today, with rainforests covering most of the continent. There is a roughly 20 million year gap between the Mekosuchus fossils on the mainland and the later island-dwelling species. Mekosuchus caupocusi inhabited the Vanuatu Islands. The Mekosuchus type species, Mekosuchus inexpectius, lived on the islands of New Caledonia, the same islands chosen for the filming of the first episode of Walking with Dinosaurs. Given the presence of two different species of Mekosuchus on two different island chains, along with the presence of a closer relative named Volia on Fiji at roughly the same time, Mekosuchus was likely once widespread throughout the Pacific Islands. Mekosuchus belonged to its own branch of Crocodilia, Mekosuchinae. While there is still some debate about where Mekosuchinines fit into Crocodilia, it is clear they were at least more closely related to crocodiles than alligators are. Mekosuchus's resemblance to its distant, Mesozoic relatives was merely the result of evolutionary convergence after it lost its ties to the water. The first Mekosuchinines were actually very similar to crocodiles, and filled the same niches in Australia and the surrounding islands for most of the Cenozoic era. However, Mekosuchus's closest relatives were also fully terrestrial. Volia lived during the Pleistocene, and like Mekosuchus, lasted even after the last ice age. It grew to about 3 meters long. The other terrestrial Mekosuchinines lived on mainland Australia. Trilophosuchus lived during the Miocene, and was about the same size as Mekosuchus. Although the Mekosuchinine Quencana wasn't very large when it first evolved during the Oligocene, it eventually grew to become one of the largest carnivores in Australia when humans first arrived over 20 million years later. Due to their isolation, both the Vanuatu Islands and New Caledonia were home to numerous endemic species besides Mekosuchus, many of which are, unfortunately, now extinct. Of the two island chains, New Caledonia's extinct fauna are the better studied. Since the only native mammals on the islands are bats, birds took over many of the same niches. These included the flightless Sylviornis. This large, big-headed bird only lived an average of 5 to 7 years, which Mekosuchus may have been partially responsible for. However, Mekosuchus was not the only native carnivore. A large, unnamed species of monitor lizard was also present on the island. A more precise estimate of its size has not yet been given, so it is not clear where it fit in the food chain in relation to Mekosuchus. An even stranger reptile was Myolinea. This late surviving relative of turtles was reminiscent of the ankylosaurian dinosaurs and the mammalian glyphodonts. Not only was it heavily armored, but it also had a club tail. While some species of Myolinea could grow surprisingly large, the shell of the species native to New Caledonia, Myolinea mackay, was only about 70 centimeters long. Therefore, while daunting, it is not inconceivable that Mekosuchus could have occasionally taken them down. Fossils that may belong to another species of Myolinea have also been found in the Vanuatu Islands, the home of Mekosuchus caupocusi, although their identity is disputed. While it is not known when or why Mekosuchus became extinct on the Australian mainland, the fate of the island species is less mysterious. Mekosuchus survived the end of the last ice age without any problems, but when humans arrived on its island homes around 3,000 years ago, Mekosuchus and many of its contemporaries quickly perished. It is thought they were the victims of overhunting. This hypothesis is supported by a Mekosuchus calpocusi fossil, which was found among human refuse at an archaeological site. Other factors likely included humans overhunting Mekosuchus's prey, habitat alteration, and the introduction of invasive species such as dogs. The extinction of Mekosuchus marked the end of Mekosuchinae. It also marked the end of something even older. The first Crocodylomorphs were ancestrally terrestrial. Even when the ancestors of today's crocodilians became semi-aquatic, terrestrial species were still an important part of the fauna for the entire Mesozoic era, especially in the south. One group of land crocs, the Sebecids, managed to outlive the non-avian dinosaurs, and survived until about 12 million years ago, long after Mekosuchus evolved. This means that Mekosuchus's extinction marked the first time there wasn't a land croc since Crocodylomorpha first evolved over 225 million years ago. Still, there are a few crocodilians who spend much of their time on land. These semi-terrestrial species include the dwarf crocodiles, both species of Paleosuchus, and the much larger and more deadly Cuban crocodile. Given time and the right conditions, they could eventually become fully terrestrial. Unfortunately, the futures of most of these species is currently imperiled by mankind. If the world is to once again be home to land crocs, humanity will have to give them the chance it denied Mekosuchus. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something interesting. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you would like to see more. Finally, be sure to have a great day.